Today's guest is someone who's been in the center of the most important transformations happening in the enterprise technology. The convergence of data, governance, context, and of course AI. We're joined with Karthik Ravindran, the General Manager of Worldwide Go-to-Market for Microsoft's data platforms. Karthik leads Microsoft's global strategy and execution for data and analytics platforms as the foundation for enterprise AI transformation. Over 25 years, Karthik has built Microsoft's internal data office, led the several enterprise data transformations, created and launched the Microsoft Purview for data governance, guided some of the world's largest organizations, and responsible for scaling multiple AI transformations. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. I'll start with this. Today morning, I was actually watching Satya Nadella's one of the many things he does on LinkedIn. And interestingly, he was talking about 20 plus million agents running within Microsoft. These are security, management, observability, runtime, co-pilots. What do these agents not do? Like, how is Microsoft invested in so many agents?
Yeah, that's a great one to unpack. I think in Microsoft, we have a very fundamental philosophy, right? Which is as we guide our customers to do things, let's first make sure that we can do and use those things ourselves, right? And the culture of experimentation to go try the art of the possible, to get learnings from the art of the possible, and then to share back with our customers what we found to work. Because in some ways, the world knows Microsoft as this technology company that produces products. But internally, operationally, we're like a global enterprise like anyone else in the same category, right? And being able to back our products and our stories with, hey, this is how we live and breathe it internally ourselves, is front and center to our practice and our philosophy, right? So yes, we are going into every function, into every role, and together with our people, of course, not without our people. And that's a key topic we should come back to, I think, as a part of this dialogue. To go in and really look deep into how can this technology, AI, when applied well, help people to do more of what people are meant? How can it help people scale? And not just looking at it through the lens of engineers, but looking at it through the lens of every corporate function and functional practitioner in the company, right? So when you hear those large numbers, the numbers, I think, are largely reflective of a lot of experiments that are actively in progress within the company, and learning from those experiments, guiding the investments that we push to production to scale.
Yes.
As well as tons and tons of learnings that are continuing to even teach us and shape our own approach to how we practice and how we take the practice to the market. Right. So I think it's very exciting times. So it's really good to be in a place where you don't just build the tech, but you actually get to apply, use the tech, learn from the applications, and then share learnings that can help others be successful with it.
You're in the middle of all of this, Karthik. Fantastic. Look, I always get excited when I hear Satya Nadella talk. I'm sure this is not the first time you're hearing this, but I want to start with a quick introduction about yourself. Please tell us your background and how you ended up in doing what you do now.
100%. Yes, I think you gave a pretty good intro. I'll go a little deeper. So yes, 27 years now at Microsoft. The last 15 years have all been focused in the data analytics, and now like all of us in the AI space. I took a fairly, I would say, orthodox career path within Microsoft. I didn't just pick a function and stick with a function. My first 10 years were very focused on services, some product management, some engineering, and really soaking it all in, because the joy of being able to learn in a large company like Microsoft is phenomenal. Yeah. The outside world, it looks like one large umbrella. Inside, it's a ton of different mini startups that are coming together to grow the mission. And I'm very thankful for that journey, being able to get those rich, wide experiences without having to hop across multiple companies to do that. And then somewhere along my journey, I think about year 10, 12, it's like it struck me that, man, I'm actually finding my center of gravity, and the center of gravity happened to be here. And then ever since then, there's been no looking back.
Nice.
So experiences and data include building and running data teams for products, running data teams for functions like marketing, and then going on to do what I would describe as one of my most, I would say, challenging as well as like high growth career roles, which was building and running our internal data office. Coming from a full-on technology background prior to now needing to bring business stakeholders and functions along the journey, not just any one function, but functions across the enterprise.
You were the chief data officer internally, like a corporate facing role. Yeah, that's why
I ran the data office for our chief digital officer, and we didn't have a formal title called chief data officer, but that's the equivalent of what I was doing. And I had a team of some outstanding technologists spread across data science, analytics, data engineering. But our biggest challenge was, how do we speak the language of the business? And how do we get data to be applied as a practice and a function that can benefit every function in the organization, not just technical engineering functions. Right? So that was a massive journey. I'm sure we'll unpack it later in this conversation, but culture transformation, change management, there was a lot that went into it that truly, I would say, grew me as a leader myself as well. Then I went on to take those learnings and then apply that in building the Purview data governance solution, the one in market right now. And of course, data governance is also reshaping with AI and like everything that's taken a whole life of its own, which we'll talk about. And then in my current role, I lead the worldwide go-to-market for all things data platforms of Microsoft, right? So this includes all of our database systems. It includes Fabric. It includes Fabric's integrations with all things AI. It includes data governance and the full stack. The thing I really enjoy about my roles, especially in the last 10 years since the CDO role, is the energy that I get from working with other data leaders, AI practitioners, and the community and our customers. So every role since my CDO role has entailed me playing a role in customer engagements and helping customers navigate their own data and AI transformation journeys. That is something that I think, as you can also speak to, is probably the most enriching part of roles at what we are in, right? Where learning never stops, learning. And in fact, I still like to say that I'm an eternal student. You do stuff, you practice, you sometimes get the outputs you need and want, sometimes you get outputs that teach you things, right? And no matter which way you look at it, it's all good learning. So continuing that learning journey, I think, is one of the most fascinating things in the industry and the domain that we're on. So I was looking forward to lots more. Yeah.
The DNA of Microsoft is learning, and I've heard that many times. And it clearly, based on how many times you use the word learning in your introduction, that shows that you are truly a Microsofter. I don't know if that's the word we use. Talking about Purview. So now so it is the conference season. I've been to two very big conferences in the last couple of weeks at the time of this recording. And there is one word that I've heard 1 billion times, and that's called the context. So you're now in the middle of this. I've seen you debate topics. I've seen you talk about why context matters for AI, but very few understand how to operationalize context in enterprise scale. You've been a CDO internally. That's how you came up with the Purview, product, if you will. What is this context, and why is it so important for AI transformation?
100%. Let's unpack this. This is a multi-layered topic, and I think the trick here for us is to unpack this in a language that can be broadly related, right? So as the industry, I think, put it right now, is this thing called the context layer. Yep. Some speak of it as graph, some call it the semantic layer, and there's multiple jargon around it. And the question that you well posed is exactly what I get from customers every time I talk to them, which is, what is this thing? What should we think about it? And I like to keep it really simple. I think we've gone through a few years when AI first came to surface in its new incarnation, around this notion of your AI being only as good as its data.
Right? Yes.
And now if you took that one step further, yes, it's true. Your AI can only be as good as your data, but your AI can also only be as great as the context that it has about your data. So what exactly is context? Context is the meaning. Right? The meaning. And the reason it's so important is because AI can do for you what it can also do for your competitor. But what differentiates you from your competitor is that unique meaning of your purpose, of your business, of the customers that you serve, right? Yes. Meaning that you shaped over years and years of experience. That meaning that you're continuing to share with a vision for where you want to take your brand and your purpose. That's what differentiates.
Yes.
And that meaning needs to be front and center to what you feed AI, so that AI can truly create its magic and work for you in the context of that meaning.
That's right.
And that is both, it is structural and it is non-structural. The structural meaning are things that are well understood by most practitioners in the data space. Like, for instance, how do you take your physical data assets and map them to your business entities? How do you model relationships between those entities? And this largely
catalogs, if you will, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That formulates what's the semantic model or the semantic layer, right? Which is a nice way to structure your data for purposes of reporting and analytics. But structuring data for reporting and analytics doesn't necessarily get into the intricate definitions that actually define what's unique to your business and what each of those constructs mean. If you start with some simple examples, let's take a simple thing like revenue, right? Great. Revenue in the context of a balance sheet is very different from revenue in the context of a forecasting model. In a balance sheet, it needs to be accurate. It needs to be straight rate. You can't afford to have mistakes in your reporting out to the street. In a forecasting model, it can be directional. It needs to be within some range of accuracy, but it doesn't have to be precision perfect. So when you use the word revenue in these two different, I would say, settings, the meaning of revenue within those settings is incredibly important. And that is a very simple way to think about why meaning is so critical to the data. Because if that meaning cannot be interpreted by humans in a certain context, imagine the ability for AI to interpret that. And then if AI misinterprets the meaning of your data, then the hallucinations and the AI risks that could then come to bear could be like pretty detrimental. So we really articulate the meaning of your data. Yeah, sorry, but yeah.
No, I even feel that the word you used, the hallucination word you used, has changed over the last couple of years. Remember when ChatGPT came up with their first GPT, November 2023, hallucination at that point fundamentally means it gives wrong answers, it gives wrong spellings, it gives all those silly things. We're way past that point with the maturity of models. Now it's about hallucination, meaning the meaning of the data or the answer it gives you itself in that context of the setting. a CDO versus a CFO versus a CMO asking, who are my customers? Each one has the same question, but different context, if you will, right? Same kind of situation.
That's right. And we should talk a little bit about the non-structural aspects of context, right? Because so far about the structural meaning around data entities, attributes, scenarios, and so on. But there's an entire gamut of context around what is just flow of work signals. Every single day, when data is acted upon, when decisions are made, when choices are made, there are decisions that are being made.
Yes.
And very often, if you pay careful attention to it, those decisions are not captured anywhere. Or they're captured in highly unstructured flow of work artifacts. Conversations in your favorite communication tool, messages and documents in your collaboration tools.
Email.
Highly attributed into data that gets stored into structured systems. And sometimes it can also be sitting in the minds of human beings, right? Not captured in any unstructured or structured artifact.
Tacit knowledge.
Right? Like even within Microsoft, there are still times when to truly understand, like, hey, like, why was a decision made to navigate a customer in a certain way and present a certain kind of an offer to win the deal? Not just Microsoft for that matter, but any large enterprise for that matter.
Sure.
I'm 100% certain that understanding will not be uniformly captured, interpreted, and understood for future reuse at the scale at which it should. So this whole notion that I think Foundation Capital made really prominent in the industry when they started this concept of the context graph, where Jay Gupta, the person who planned on writing that marvelous piece of work, talks about this concept of decision traces, right? How critical it is to capture decision traces, because there's static or slow changing context, and then there's rapidly changing, evolving context where the signals are constantly coming in every sort of second of the day. And those context signals are not really captured with as much intent and correlated to the structural classes. But in the new world of context, you got to bring those two things together, right? You can't think them as completely disconnected, isolated items, because they truly do form two sides of the same coin. So when you hear about terminologies like knowledge graphs and ontologies and other such, that's where the chasm starts to shift.
Yes.
What is your static definition and meaning of your business? What is the dynamic realization of that meaning, including actions that can also contribute back to the meanings? So bringing those two worlds together has made this entire gamut, I think, a whole lot more exciting right now. And I think we're right in the thick of this. We're all learning a lot. I don't think any of us have all of the answers and all the solutions, but I think the recognition of the importance of this thing and how critical it is to get it right, I think is a great step in the right direction.
That's a lot to unpack, by the way, but I'm going to start a little smaller, right? So governance. Now, one of your strongest arguments in a lot of public, information you've released is that governance and innovation is no longer competing priorities, right? And to me, what that means is in your innovation DNA, you have to have governance more like, as a default within your innovation DNA. It should not be the separate thing of before or after innovation. So now, when I look at your definition of context, both in the structural and non-structural way, innovation happens everywhere, but data is the key for innovation as much as everything else. So how does governance change in this world of structural and non-structural context innovation? I don't know if that's a word.
That's a great topic. I think first we should unpack governance, because that term, I'm sure you've seen this too, but the kind of reactions that can evoke can oscillate from the spectrum of complete love for the term to complete, I would say, angst.
Yes, a lot of CDO discussions that I've had, Karthik, still feel that governance is more bureaucracy and more politics and less about how do I add value to my AI transformation. There's not enough conversation about AI transformation and governance's value, but please proceed.
Totally, 100%, well said. I think that a shift in how you portray governance from not being a red tape, bureaucratic decelerator of innovation to instead being a champion and an enablement of the key word here is responsible innovation. That conversation shift needs to happen, right? And to make that connect, you really have to boil down governance to its fundamentals without even using the word governance. For me, it comes down to a few very simple primitives. It's about data discovery, it's about data understanding, data access, and data use, all anchored on the pillar of trust, right? And if you break this apart, the easiest way that I found to explain the value of governance to someone or to get them energized is to start with the basics, which is what's in it for you? Like, why should you care about governance? And let's forget for a moment that there's even a term that's called governance. If you could discover the data that you need for your use cases with ease, if you could clearly understand the data, including when to use a piece of data versus when not to use a piece of data, if you could rest assured that when you access the data, you're doing it within the compliance boundaries, the security boundaries to keep your organization safe. If you could safely use the data, including knowing that the controls needed to prevent the misuse of the data is in place so that you cannot even accidentally sort of like do something that puts you out of your organization's compliance boundary.
Yeah.
And by the way, all of the fundamentals needed to accomplish that was baked into a trust foundation, which you don't need to build, you don't need to operate, but instead you can just focus on doing what you do the best, creating value from the data, but doing it safely and responsibly. And if something could make all that work for you, would that not be awesome? And you have to come across a single decision maker, who would say like, I don't want all of that. And then when you tell them, hey, guess what all of that is? That's governance done well. That's governance enabling you, not governance slowing you down. And then it becomes the next level of click down, which is great. Now, how do you go accomplish that? The challenge with governance has always been that it's positioned as something that is run by a central data office, that's run by a few experts in data, versus realizing that to truly do governance well, going back to our term context, the understanding, the meaning of the business entities, the business processes, the concepts, relationships, that exists in every organizational function. It doesn't exist in any one singular function.
Yes.
To truly make governance successful, you need to make it a team sport in which players from across these organizational functions are participating and contributing to shaping the sport. And that shift of the mindset from a center of excellence to a champion of enablement when approaching governance is a very, very critical change management for organizations to drive. AI in some ways is the tailwind to actually make this a much more meaningful discussion. Because of AI, the risks are multifold. Not just multifold, they can scale at the speed of AI, which is pretty scary to think about it. If AI can detect a vulnerability, it can also exploit the vulnerability. If AI can detect a compliance sort of like compromise, it can also take advantage of that, right? So in situations like this, having the right guardrails, the right policies, engaging the domain experts to set and define them, continuously tune them, and making governance more something that just shows up in the flow of work is going to be, I think, the paradigm shift that needs to be practiced and enabled. Practiced by the applied organizations, enabled by the providers of governance solutions, right? So lots to unpack there, but I think it's a fascinating time to just fundamentally change the conversation of what governance is and what it should be.
So I love the way you've kind of broken it down. Have you heard about this thing called Dharma flywheel? I know what that is. So I was just, as you were explaining this to me, I want to take a minute to actually compare and contrast the was and the should be, okay? What Dharma was and is that governance flywheel in Dharma is data quality, metadata, data architecture, data warehousing, reference data and master data, and a few other things, okay? There's like 7 or 8 things in the Dharma flywheel. And the way you just explained it to me in plain English, you said discovery, understanding, assets, use, and trust. Mm-hmm. I almost feel like, oh my God, this Dharma needs to be reset immediately for people who are hearing this, because essentially what you just did, if I go back and compare these words that I just said, reference data, master data. Look, everybody knows what master data is, but no marketing, sales, or finance person will care about it. You said, what's in it for me? How do I start with what's in it for me? And then how do I go use these words such as discovery? Which basically means I want to discover how this data could be meaningful for me. I want to understand how to use it and how can I, get value out of it. And assets, meaning how do I look at what is out there? What systems, what data is out there? And the use, who's using it? Why are they using it? What's in it for them? And then the trust, the security, privacy, governance, guardrails, all of those things. Well said. I mean, I'm almost gonna, in my mind, thinking about writing a blog about the old Dharma wheel and the new Karthik Dharma.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to put it. And one thing I'd add there to make it even more interesting is that all those learnings that we had in our data journey now applies as much to our context journey.
Yes.
So it's not just about AI or humans discovering and understanding and using the right data. It's also discovering, understanding, and using it for the right context, right? Yes. So many of those practices, right, which we've learned through, I would say, trial and error sometimes through a lot of hardship, are in essence a bit thrown away, right? A lot of people come and ask me, like, oh my God, it's like, do I have some dimension making my entire management philosophy for how I manage context management? Not really. There's a lot of similarities if you think about it. And if you give out context, what is it? It's metadata, but it's richer metadata than just technical.
I was about to say, if I unpack the technicalities of what you just said, the discovery is enabled by catalog. The understanding is also enabled by glossary. And then the lineage is actually how you use the data. Where is it coming from? Where is it going? Who is it using it? The trust is data security. So in a way, if I actually look at the Dharma wheel and what you said, if you unpack what you said behind the scenes from an IT, from a technology side, it is all of that.
100%.
Right? So now I want to jump into the operating model of so we talked about the context, what it is and how it could be used. And we talked about the governance around the context. Now I want to actually go to the process or the framework or the model. So as of today, it still remains that 90% of AI is still not in production yet, right? And there's a fundamental operating model disruption. And in your experience, both building the internal data office and working with a number of customers, what are some of the organizational barriers today that does not allow us to deploy these models in production? And B, take notice of this context. I know it's a big marketing word right now. A number of organizations are thinking through it. Why is it not in a CEO's priority at this point?
Yeah, got it. So I think the best way to unpack it is to look at the two extremities at where sometimes investments start and how the extremities can become bottlenecks, if not bridge to something that's more middle ground, right? So one extremity is trying to boil the ocean and say like, I'm going to build this perfect context layer before I get started. Or I'm going to build the perfect unified data estate before I get started. And we had the hard learning of trying to do that in Microsoft when I first started the data office, where the goal was to go build this massive data layer. You can bring all the data in the company together before we can start activating start. Yeah. And that's a non-starter because you're going to end up spending so much time trying to build infrastructure and do the academic technical stuff that your business users are going to lose patience. And then guess what will happen? They'll end up going and proliferating their own investments and standing up their own islands, right? So I think number one is to really come to terms with the fact that you can boil the ocean. We're dealing with like decades and years of organically evolved data estates and now context estates in the mix. If you're going to boil, you want to get started. So the approach that I generally recommend is start with a use case. Start with a value outcome that you're trying to accomplish. And sometimes the value outcome might have multiple micro use cases with it. Go at it one use case at a time. Take a use case. Understand the data estate needed to make that use case great. Understand the gaps or what you might already have and the gaps of the context that is needed to make that data estate more easy to discover, understand, and use by not just the humans, but now AI agents.
Yes.
Shape the data layer and the context layer for that use case. Get that use case going. Experiment. Learn from the outputs. Sometimes the learnings, especially when you're getting started, may not be what you hope to get. And that's great. Don't look at it as a failure. Look at it as a learning. And then you can patch what you got to go patch, right? And then continue this evolving the scenarios, evolving the use cases. Starting out with a use case that is attached to some horizontal domain that can serve multiple functions in your organization can give you a bigger bang for the buck than going into something that is super siloed and specific to just one particular, I would say, function. Yes. A great example is customer data, for instance. Customer data is used by every function in the organization. If you can figure out how to unify even a subset of your customer data and put the right meaning and context around it, your marketing team can benefit from it. Your sales team can benefit from it. Your finance team can.
The critical data elements. Right?
So I think the iterative approach is going to be super important to solve or to avoid the first extremity, which is ocean boiling.
Yeah.
Then there's the other extremity, which is like, agents can just do everything for us. Let's just go run wild. It's like, PM doesn't write a PRD, PM now produces a POC, and now the PM is anxious to push the button and put the POC into production. Do that, and then guess what? Everything comes crashing down, right? And that is, I think, a very dangerous extremity as well. Because something that looks nice in a POC that an agent generates up for you may be totally not aligned with the way in which your organization has built, established, and hardened, practices like enterprise architecture, security, compliance, and other fundamentals that are really needed to take that thing and make it work. Sometimes even as simple as, here's a great POC. Oh, great, that POC mocked up my data. But guess what? In the real world, I need the POC to become my ERP system to make it work.
That's right.
Now, ERP system is a data system that doesn't have the tools and AI agent-friendly APIs around it. Good luck. By the time you try to plumb back, you're going to be spending a whole bunch of work trying to go reach that, right? So I think this whole notion of what is becoming popular in the industry, right, which is, I think you've heard about this concept of harness engineering, AI harnesses, like this notion of really being able to put the policies, the guardrails, in a way that can systemically scale at the scale of AI agents. In fact, a lot of software engineers who are now kind of worried about what does my role become? What is my future? I would highly encourage them to think about how much more fun and exciting the role is just now. Instead of writing more repetitive code, they can now be focused on building these harnesses for their organizations. They can be focused on
become more orchestrator. They become more of an orchestrator than a developer, than a hands-on.
Orchestrators, integrators, solving tough challenges. How do you put MCPs around your enterprise systems that have existed for years and that you cannot rip and replace? How do you build a harness which any agent can come and sit on top of and not compromise your fundamentals around security, governance, and compliance? How do you then expose all of this through tools that can be discovered and used by the choice of agents and AI systems that your business functions and users might want to use? Right. So there's awesome notion of the backend as a service as the industry side to talk to it, where, hey, great. Now to truly take these rapid prototypes and push them into production, how do you make sure that you don't compromise, what is classically known as the backend? But in many ways, I would say the orchestration layer needed to get all this right and working at scale. And putting the discipline into that, right? Not just getting enamored by this, I can produce this thing in 5 minutes and therefore I can push it to production in 10 minutes. Guess what? You'll be bringing it down in 15. So it's instead of that, not losing sight of the fact that there are still fundamentals you got to focus on, and then the functions figuring out that complementary play.
Right.
Where the engineers and the architects and the deeply technical folks can focus on those fundamentals. And then the other folks who are sitting in the edges where the business understanding exists, where the context exists, can truly complement to drive the velocity of innovation while still supported and enabled by the fundamentals that the more technical folks can provide. Right? So in many ways, it's a 1 + 1 greater than 3 opportunity that unfortunately gets into these IQ cancellation states. Where the business wants to go past, the technology wants to stop, or the technology wants to boil the ocean and the business gets frustrated. Instead of that, if you take it one use case at a time, focus on the data estate, the context, fundamentals, the harnesses that are needed, then over time, the snowball effect will catch up. Your first few iterations might be slow, but then over time, you can find greater use. And then the spin wheel starts going faster. And then the value and velocity and everything starts to get to where you want it to be. Right? So patience, I think,
Yeah, and I think, Karthik, it almost sounds like we used to do this thing called agile delivery a few years ago. That's the way to go to deliver projects, right? I feel that you are talking about agile delivery frameworks that we've known and loved and continue to build. The only difference now becomes, hey, let's take this big enterprise data landscape, break it down to smaller chunks, and understand how to do these tied to a particular use case, and then continue to build agile deliveries on top of that, build context layers after context layers. So take the critical data elements, add on it. Before you know, you'll have a customer data or customer context graph fully available for the enterprise to be consumed by different parts of business. Am I getting that right?
I think you nailed it, right? It goes back to the macro point that we just talked about earlier, which is a lot of the practices have already existed for years.
Exactly.
It's adapting and evolving those practices for this new world. Some concepts certainly come to the front more strongly than they have in the past.
Yes.
Like if you talk to some of the folks who are really purists in the space, they will make a very valid point, which is, hey, this thing that you guys are talking about right now and calling context and getting all excited about, guess what? That's what metadata was, right? And that's what business metadata was supposed to be, right? And this thing that you guys are calling like ontologies and all this stuff, guess what? That's what RDF was.
That's right.
It's just that some of those things did not catch on at that point in time because some of those concepts were way ahead of their time. There wasn't a tailwind to push those concepts to the front. But now AI is the tailwind that is bringing in this huge force that is requiring those fundamentals, which in the past were considered to be academic, to now become mainstream operational in production. And of course, they're coming out with these cool terms and language around them, which is good. There's genuine goodness in some of the term simplification and everything else, right? Like who understands RDF? Versus people are finding it hard enough to understand the word context, let alone all of these acronyms, right? But you're spot on and say agile delivery mindset, right? Like even agile that you're talking about, it's one of the most abused terms.
Yes.
Because people, I've literally seen teams where they will take a strong playbook, they'll try to implement the playbook exactly the way the book defines. It won't work, and then they'll come back and blame agile. And I'm like, no. The biggest thing that you missed was the framework you get in Scrum is a framework, but you have to contextualize it for your team, for your people, for your culture.
Yes.
It's like a toolbox. It gives you a bunch of things. Take the tools that matter and be incrementally aware and conscious of how do you progress that adoption. And be 100%. Clear, if it doesn't work for your people, if it doesn't work for your culture, it doesn't matter what you follow, it won't work, right? It's a practitioner mindset, that adaptability to really take into consideration not just the technology, but the people, the culture, the change management, all anchored on the same fundamentals. That is a massive, I think, opportunity ahead of us for technologists who in the past were very focused on just the tech. But now who can really become these change agents, these change management agents, right? These systems thinkers who can help people get rid of the puzzle. So yeah, very exciting times.
And I think one observation that I've also seen, not just talking to you, but many strategists and practitioners, is the fact that yes, 10 years ago, these agile terms, these were all very technical in some ways, right? Nobody knows what a sprint is or a PI is and all these things. We are now simplifying it in plain English because one of the main things is AI is now directly talking to the business. These data lakes and data warehouses were more IT defined, IT built. Now AI is simplifying this process, cutting the middleman. Well, I shouldn't say cutting the middleman, but reducing the middleman in IT, right? And it's available and accessible to the business. So they need to understand how AI actually operates. Nobody cared how data warehouse actually was built or data lake was built, right? They just said, I need this data, I need this report, I need this app, go build it for me. I don't care how you do it. So I think you're also hitting an important point here that old practices are coming back. But this also, I want to ask you an honest question. How many enterprises are actually ready to move from this old school yet rinse and repeat of this data governance and agile delivery models and all of that to this new school from a culture perspective? Or is AI almost forcing them to get there faster?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. And what I mean by that is, I think AI has been the strongest tailwind that is getting people to reconsider their prior perspectives on some of these practices that might have in the past been considered to be like more revolution nature. Right. Versus now, what is really good to see, at least in my recent customer conversations, is there's not a single customer conversation in the recent few months that I've had where the word change management has not come.
Of course.
And has not come up in a good way, not in a negative way, but in a good way. In the past, it's come up in the worst possible contexts. But now it's actually like, hey, for us to truly cross this POC to production at scale shift, for us to truly make this work for our organizations, we have to focus as much on our culture and our people as much as the technology. There is a narrative that is shaping from largely the AI providers, which is all focused on that passion for the tech, and the tech being very focused on, I would say, efficiencies. And the primary talk track you will get from any tech provider, AI provider, is how this can automate and give you efficiencies. And the more dangerous talk track is replace people, right? Versus where most customers, the applied customers that I see are at, is they don't just drink the Kool-Aid the way it's being poured. They look at it through the lens of, yes, efficiency is important, but more important than efficiencies is enablement and empowerment. But AI needs to serve some persona. It's got to serve somebody, and it's got to serve a purpose. And usually the forces behind purposes are people. AI in itself is not going to come and create a purpose and create a person. The purpose is always led by a person who has the context, who has the vision. And AI can be a force accelerant of helping that person realize it, or helping a group of people realize it, if applied the right way. It complement that human strength, not try and replace. But getting the two edges to work together, especially in these challenging times, there's not a single day when we wake up and don't see some post, some article somewhere that talks about like either an organization choosing to just let go of people, or a tech provider claiming that this agent can do the work of like 10x whatever people. It's like, and those talk tracks, while they are super, I would say, exciting for technologists to come and portray, I think the intentionality that is needed is for that person or the people who project their talk tracks to put themselves on the other side of the receiving end and look at how it plays out to them. The reality is, like, every function just had the opportunity to redefine and reframe itself. Could define how the function and the people in the function can be more productive doing what they're uniquely positioned to do together with AI. But that opportunity needs to be created. The opportunity for conversation, the opportunity for role shaping, the opportunity to evolve and learn and grow into this world, where people can continue to do more of what they're uniquely positioned to do, and the AI sort of complement and scale them and things that they would actually be better at handing off to AI. That change management is very, very pronounced. And that culture shift has to be intentional. That's the work of leadership, Adam, right? And if you don't navigate the work of leadership, you're going to go back to that same problem, which is you might be able to get a few things into production, but when stuff hits the roof, and it will in almost every case,
right?
The people who have to be able to take the responsibility, the peoples, are still going to be humans, right? And when those people can shape the context going in, can shape the architecture, can shape the overarching framework within which the AI needs to function and operate for a purpose and a brand, are going to be much well-positioned, much better and well-positioned to handle those cases, right? And so I think there's a very interesting but dangerous talk track that is shaping an industry which the leaders have to look at with a more critical squint. And really help rebalance to this notion of it's always human plus AI. It's not human minus AI, right? And that, yeah.
I have a question there. It's a very contradictory question. So I'm sure you're hearing this every day. C-suite is common, every day they're bombarded with speed and disruption. Somewhere out there in LinkedIn and social media and news, people are saying, true or not, let's keep that aside. But they're constantly bombarded with, if you don't do AI at scale, at speed today, your industry is going to be disrupted. So now how do you actually balance speed and disruption to let's stop and smell the roses and let's make sure that we are intentional about change management, we're intentional about our people. And by the way, I agree with you 100%. But people enablement takes time, it takes effort, it takes intentionality. And then on the other side, the market is moving so fast. So how do you balance the two forces?
Totally. That's a great topic. Let's unpack that. So look, I think the first thing is, right, this whole notion of speed being the most important thing, you got to look at that with a critical lens as well. A simple way to do this is, let's take a concept that I think we all know, real-time intelligence. Everybody talks about real-time intelligence. Everything needs to be real. But does everything really have to be real-time? Sometimes the risks that you get by trying to make everything real-time is higher than due diligence that is needed for signals to stitch, connect, and synthesize into some insight that's actually a meaningful action, right?
That's right.
So it's more about right-time intelligence than it is about real-time or on-real. The same way, it's about the right velocity, right? Not every problem is going to be probabilistic in nature. If you carry it back to the fundamentals of AI, what is this about? It's about probability. right? It is about being able to predict what's next. And there's a lot of creativity that goes into what gets predicted. There's a whole ton of requirements, business problems, opportunities that are purely deterministic in nature. Something is purely deterministic. The probabilistic aspects of AI might help you get something in that deterministic workflow run a little faster. But whatever that thing is spitting out is still very deterministic in nature. You don't want creative innovation in the production of your balance sheet. You don't.
That's right.
You really want it to be accurate.
You want it to be accurate. Yes.
You want creative innovation in the forecasting models that can show you what you could be doing. Two very different things. Right?
Yes.
So I think unpacking scenarios to really understand why the kind of rapid pace of evolution, change, and speed is needed is very crucial to do. Because sometimes your customers of your brand may not be ready for the velocity of change. What do you think is the number one feedback that your tech providers get? Oh, you guys keep changing every single week. I'm not ready for this velocity of change. Right? Now, change at a rapid velocity can be really good in certain types of scenarios. Like, for instance, take digital marketing, consumer marketing, hyper-personalized one-to-one communications. Trying to do hyper-personalized one-to-one without AI is almost mission impossible. So that's a great example of where you can actually put AI to good use.
Yeah.
Now, of course, with all the caveats and disclaimers and everything else and the full transparency to your consumers and what they're interacting with, but you can truly create game-changing experiences, experiment with your consumers, have your consumers give you reinforcement signals, make the experience better for them and for your brand. And AI can be awesome in rapid iterations. But trying to take that exact same notion and applying it to things that need to be deterministic, that need to be accurate, that need to be stable, that need to be reliable, whether it's your financial processing, or whether it's your supply chain processing, a whole bunch of mission critical functions, where the determinism, while it can be scaled with some level of AI automation, also needs to be very sensitive to, I would say, hyper probabilistic outputs, because those can be damaging and contrary to the outcomes they're trying to achieve. So I think organizations really have to unpack. Why does this kind of speed actually come to bear versus where can the speed still be valuable, but you also have to put the right guardrails around the level of creativity and probabilisticness that you bring into things that don't need it. Now there's the opposing side of this, not opposing, but the complementary side of it, which can become opposing or enabling, which is the people involved. The fundamental challenge is not trying to create the sense of fear in people about their roles getting displaced, as opposed to opening up having to have a conversation with every functioning people and functions to talk about what could your role be if you could apply AI to its fullest potential. And look at it not through the lens of applying AI to its fullest potential, but look at it as a way for you to use AI for you to perform at your fullest potential. If each of us took our roles and unpacked it, I'm sure that we will say that we are probably spending 50% of our time at max best doing what we truly enjoy doing. The other a lot of tasks that we also have to do as a part of our day-to-day roles. Now, what if you could offload some of the tasks? What if you could open up some more cycles to do things that you really wish you could do more, that you wish you could learn and start growing into? That's a very different mindset to think about, great, if you've had an ally that can help you do that, and if AI could be that ally, what could you define your role and your function to now be? But that conversation has to be two-way. And today it's not a two-way conversation. If you engage every practitioner in the functions that your organization has and create a safe environment and just put some first principles like don't resist AI, embrace AI. Don't try to become resilient to AI. Try to become more productive with AI. Now, the leadership team gives you time to go off and think about your function and what your function could look like with AI. For practitioners like yourself and others, come back with some recommendations. Think about the use cases that you're currently championing. Why can you apply AI to make it better? What is your unique differentiation, right?
Yes.
That conversation needs to be had.
By the way, and incentivize that behavior, right?
Exactly. And incentivize
they are showing that learning path and that education path that you talked about. Show that you care. So show that if your employees are going to take the time of the day, you do care and you help them go down that path, right?
100%. And then on the people side, on our side, I think there's also the due diligence and the commitment that is needed from the people. Because people have a fundamental choice to make. Is this rapid pace of change, is this kind of evolution for them or not?
Yes.
People cannot resist the technology in front of them, right?
So,
in fact, there's a very simple thing, right? It's not AI that's going to replace someone. It is someone who has learned to embrace AI who's going to be someone who can replace someone who does not, right? And that is completely in the control of each of us as practitioners and people, right? But the leadership team has to create the work of leadership to create that safe house, to create that environment, to create the first principles, to participate with the two-way dialogue to shape what can be is what's lacking, right? The primary script that a lot of the tech providers and the tech builders are creating is not applicable to 80% of the applied organizations. Applied organizations are very different and complementary to the builders of tech.
Right.
You can't take the folks who are building tech and say everything that they're doing is also applicable to someone who has to figure out how to go use the tech to go drive some real world use case and benefit. They're two very different things, right? So I think that's the kind of balance we have to, be more intentional about.
This was an absolutely incredible way of differentiating the speed and disruption side of the house to the enablement and leadership side of the house. Fascinating discussion. I think we need to have definitely another podcast just to talk about this, because there are so many things, so many questions I have, in my mind, but we're a little out of time, unfortunately. But here, I do want to kind of wrap it up by talking about the future. There is so many exciting things y'all are doing in Microsoft, and you are constantly helping C-suite and organizations to go from, say, systems of record to systems of context to systems of intelligence and so many other systems of engagement to add as well. How do you see the future going, even within Microsoft and even outside as you're working with your clients? What excites you?
Yeah, look, I think we should look at it through two lenses: the builders of the tech and the appliers of the tech. Right?
Okay.
Let's approach it from the appliers of the tech, which is where most of our audience are likely to be situated.
Yes.
The most important thing to take away, hopefully, from our conversation today is how the basics themselves are not being reinvented. The basics are what they've been for like a long while.
Yes.
The basics are being reframed and they're evolving to this new age. And it all starts with something that's very fundamentally primitive, which is, if you can answer the question, like, who are you serving with this technology? What purpose are you empowering and advancing with this technology? Then you might want to think twice about whether you embark on a project to go do something that can't have clear answers to those two questions. Because most likely what you're going to have is technology, you're not going to have transformation. If you really want to have transformation, start with who, why, and the notion of empowerment versus just the notion of efficiency. Because when you empower a group of people or a persona, when you empower a purpose, the efficiencies will be natural outcomes versus leading with efficiencies and then trying to figure out how do you empower, right? So that mindset shift, I think, is a very fundamental thing, right? You can call it system of whatever the new fancy term you want to call it, but that system, right? The word system shouldn't get connotated with just technology.
System of learning.
System of learning, system of adaptation. We should come up with some term that has nothing to do with technology. And a great book that I would encourage people to read is this book called Thinking in Systems. It's a phenomenal book, because we technologists, when we hear the word system, we directly connect it to technology systems, databases, infrastructure, ERPs, whatever. Yeah. But if you really think about a system is just a set of moving parts. Those moving parts can be people, it can be processes, it can be technology and interconnections between all of the above. Yep. And that notion of a system doesn't change in the world of AI. The world of AI is bringing in new dimensions that will help you rethink and reframe us. In other words, you got to start first with like, what's the business process that you're trying to truly re-engineer and dramatically reframe? And why are you trying to do it? If you did it, who's it going to serve? What outcomes is it going to drive faster and better? And hopefully even cheaper. Then you have a starting point. You then go think about, I think, what do you call this, like true transformation. That's on the applied side, right? So really become systems thinkers. Simple takeaway, become systems thinkers. On the provider side, right? Look, it's not like there's any dearth of models and dearth of technology. Right now, what we are really facing is a bigger gap, which is the impact gap. I think technology providers have to take on the accountability of making sure that the technology's applications, by the folks who are applying it, are set up to be able to do that with the utmost responsibility.
100%.
Everybody on the planet is not a token, right? I mean, even the high-tech companies in the world are having a hard time trying to keep up with token spend and token economics. Most of the companies are not even close to having that kind of token cap, right? So even something as simple as being able to provide a tech, where there are guardrails in place that can ensure that the builders, the appliers, don't end up in states where they just burn through their investments, their economics, to try and use this technology and not gain any value.
Yep.
How would you put in guardrails to make sure that responsible economics, responsible practices, responsible governance are all just baked in as fundamentals so that your customers, the applying organizations, can benefit from, right? How do you know when to draw the line between, we've got enough models, let's now focus on helping our customers take these models and convert them into real world applied value before we continue to build more models? Right? These are some tough choices, right? Where sometimes this frenzy of innovation and needing to be like at the bleeding edge of everything, it's putting us in a place right now where the tech is at a completely different level of progress versus the applied use cases and the impact. And these two things need to even out and catch up at some point. I think the tech is always going to stay like a bit ahead because it needs to create more ideas. But it can be so far apart, where I think the applications and the applied impact look more like pipe dreams versus reality. So the providers have as much accountability to make sure that as they're building that tech, they can articulate the right ways to use it, the responsible ways to apply it, putting guardrails in place to help people economically use it and benefit from it, right? So I think the whole notion of economics of tech providers is a huge opportunity to rethink, reframe, and approach it with the lens of the applied impact in use cases, right? So I think you bring these tools together, right? It's all about people, purposes, empowerment, and amplification, right? I mean, those are the four things that I think both the providers and the consumers have to intentionally in a healthy way challenge and push each other to accomplish, and it happens.
You've really thought through this, because I love the way you're kind of in your mind, how you're dividing, say, for example, we talked about the speed of disruption versus the how we can be human centered, right? Now we're talking about the consumers of tech and providers of tech, right? And how they can be uneven in a even plane, right? Yes, you can never be even because the tech providers are always going to be out there. But at the end of the day, if these guys, if not catch up, but if these guys can lower that a little bit, tech for this innovation for the sake of innovation with no adoption is absolutely useless, right? So fascinating. Look, I think you are very, very clear, thoughtful, and more importantly, organized. And it's about time you start thinking about a book. That would be my little recommendation for you because of the way you're structuring your thinking. Looking ahead, right? 10 years from now, where do you want your legacy, Karthik? You've been now in many, many forums, and I've known you for a few months, few years now. Where do you want to see yourself and maybe even Microsoft progress 10 years from now?
Yeah, I think from a company perspective, not just Microsoft, but any provider of tech in the space, I would love to see them like really intentionally think about being value creators and multipliers of impact, right? And that, because to me, when you achieve that, the outcome of all of the other business goals that a provider might have gets accomplished. For me personally, I think it's all about, this notion that you described earlier at Develop, right? It's continuous learning and continuous giving back and sharing. 100%. That virtuous cycle, I think, is what energizes folks like yourself and myself and others like us, right? Which is, it's not just about learning, it's also applying, and most importantly, sharing and giving. So yes, a book, as you mentioned, is certainly on my thought. I think it's about timing and getting to it finally and putting in the discipline to go get it done. I think that is something that I would certainly, look at doing somewhere down the line. I think I also want to really be able to, get into teaching at some point. So as a part of my professional gig or whether in a full-time focus, I think that is yet to be determined. Where I just enjoy this whole rush of being able to give back. Because I think that's the biggest, legacy you can leave behind, right? If you can shape and improve and one life, if you can get one person to think differently at a time, I think the impact that you can have will be multi-forward because each one that you influence can then pay it forward. We are all paying forward what we learned from our best teachers, our parents, our teachers, and our academics, and everybody else, right? So I think the thing that can really help take us forward is, as leaders, how do we grow more leaders who can carry the right messages forward and scale them forward? And anyone that we can impact in that context, I think is a win, right? So yeah, I think that's kind of where my head is at. Yeah.
And ending with the context itself. Thank you for giving me the context. So no, really appreciate it. I think this is a fascinating conversation, continuous learning and continuous application and giving back. That's what you want your legacy to be. Karthik, thank you so much for being on my show. It is an absolute pleasure to have you kind of go through the governance thoughts, the context thought, and more importantly, the human-centered AI leadership. Really appreciate what you're doing for Microsoft. I wish you good luck on that book of yours. But yeah, we should definitely have a round 2 of this and specifically go into the speed versus humans and how that kind of works.
100%. Wonderful, Arvind. Thank you so much. Great conversation. Yeah.
Thank you, Karthik.